Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program. I'm so glad you chose some time to tune in with us here at the Columbia Museum of Art. My name is Jackie Adams, Director of Art and Learning at the Columbia Museum of Art, and I am so thrilled to be in conversation today with Simon Ungless as part of the CMA exhibition Lee Alexander McQueen and Henri Rendezvous, where some of Simon's work is also featured. You're going to hear a little bit more about Simon's career, his fashion, and his printing work, along with his friendship and his early career collaborations with Lee Alexander McQueen, plus so much more. But first, while today's program is live, it is being recorded, and we'll release a version of this program shortly afterwards. We're also going to have a little bit of time at the end of today's conversation to answer a few questions from you, our audience. So while you're listening to our conversation, I would encourage you to post comments and questions in our chat feature. And as we wind down our conversation, we'll turn our attention and hopefully we'll answer a few of your burning questions. So with that, let's go ahead and let's get started. I would like to first welcome Mr. Simon Ungless.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Simon, thank you so much for being with us today. I was just telling you a little bit before we started how much of a fan I am of your work. And so I really thought that before we get started, instead of doing a big scripted biography of you, which is so easy and so wonderful to do, I thought maybe we could kick it off first with a question. And that really goes back to your biography and who you are. And I thought you could maybe tell our audience a little bit about you, yourself, and how did your creative path begin and how did it evolve and really carry you to where you are today?
Sure. That's a great question. I think fundamentally, I'm a printmaker, but I've kind of been lucky to kind of pursue the world of fashion and to be able to apply my printmaking into the world of fashion in some way. Grew up in the UK, kind of surrounded in the countryside. My mum was a designer, a knitwear designer. My dad was a gamekeeper. I had two older sisters that were very music and fashion centric. I mean, completely. And so I was exposed to a lot of fashion and a lot of music. And then, at 10 years old, punk rock happened. And I kind of started to understand that, through making clothes or modifying my clothes, that, you could become a fashion person or a designer. And then I kind of chose that pathway through high school, and I went to art college, went to fashion school, undergrad, and then went to St. Martin's for my graduate work in fashion and textiles, and which is where I met Lee McQueen and started our collaboration that went on for several years. So, I think fundamentally, I don't necessarily know if I'm fundamentally a fashion person, although I am, but I'm really predominantly, I've come to realize, and more now, is that I'm just really basically a printmaker. I love to make prints, and they end up on clothes. That's kind of what I do.
I love the fact that you talk about being a printmaker, because I have a studio background as well in printmaking. And so to see some of your work and your process has been really enjoyable for me, because it takes me back to the studio and the printmaking process. And we're going to dive in and talk about that a little bit and kind of break it down. And so I thought what we could do is sort of explore your work first and then sort of switch into talking about how you and Lee knew each other and sort of those connections there as well in the exhibition.
Sure.
So when I looked at your work, there were sort of a few themes that kind of came to mind for me. And process, of course, being a printmaker myself, you love process. But your work in particular, there are three things that kind of struck me. And the theme of like the ready-made object was really fascinating for me, the idea of chance and authenticity. So I kind of wanted to break those down a little bit with you. And you've used the word ready-made to describe your work. And from an art historical perspective, the term was first used by Marcel Duchamp. And we're both fans of Marcel Duchamp. I think you noted that you're a huge fan of his work as well.
Yeah, major.
So, and for folks who don't know who Marcel Duchamp is and what a ready-made, the kind of the technical definition of it, it really kind of generally describes art made from manufactured objects. And it really kind of hits philosophically on three key points. The first is that the choice of an object is itself a creative act. And we're going to look at some of your work that kind of illustrates this. And secondly, by canceling sort of the useful function of an object, it becomes art. And we're going to see that in your work as well. And then thirdly, that the presentation or even giving it a title to the object kind of gives it a new meaning or a new thought. So these kinds of philosophies were sort of connected to Duchamp, who coined that term ready-made. So as we go to take a look at your work, I'm going to go forward here and show a side-by-side comparison of some of your work. So I thought maybe you could share with the audience a little bit how these ideas sort of connect to the way that you approach your work conceptually and also like through the process. How does that play out?
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, the images that we're looking at are obviously from Dante, and they were Don McCullen's photographs from the Vietnam War, which I printed onto fabric and also garments. And side note is, don't do this at home. We got into a huge amount of trouble with Don McCullen at that time for doing this without any approval. I mean, we were very young and didn't know, that we had to do that. We were just really inspired by him and wanted to honor his work. But the T-shirt on the right is actually the only piece that still exists from that time, because part of at the end of the whole thing, we had to destroy all of the garments. We had to destroy the screens, the transparencies, like everything had to be destroyed in order to not face some huge legal issue. But I did keep that T-shirt, and I have that tucked away here at home. But that was, one of my ready-made ideas of printing directly onto a T-shirt. So you get the seams, you get the creases, you get folds, you get, I'm wearing one today. It's something that I've been doing since forever, and the whole thing with ready-made for me also came from punk, because we weren't, at 10 years old, you're not going to go to London and buy Vivienne Westwood. And that was the whole, and the anti kind of vibe of punk. You didn't buy things, you found things and you altered them. It wasn't, until I was doing high school and in a art history class, and suddenly I find out about Marcel Duchamp and ready-mades, and that just really resonated with me, because I'd been using my own clothes as a canvas to work with, and I continue to do that. I mean, I did that all through my undergrad, and I think I was probably wearing something to college at St. Martin's, and Lee was like, oh, I really love that. Where's that from? And I was just like, oh, it's just something, it was like a Mac or something, and it looked like the back that I'd lent against a painted wall, and it had sort of texture. And so that ended up going in, I think the first McQueen ready-made, collection, he would make something, I would print it. I think the first print one was actually the birds, but I'd been doing other things with his clothes before that. But yeah, so that shows that kind of the jacket on the left of the screen was all panel printed, and then Lee cut and tailored the jacket. But the T-shirt on the right is definitely an early ready-made print by me for McQueen. I just love that I love it. I absolutely love finding things. And what you were saying about Duchamp, those three things, it is so much about finding the piece to work with. That is so much part of the process. I spend a lot of time sourcing things, and it becomes part of my narrative. And it's the person, sorry if I'm jumping around, but it's also the person that's worn that before becomes part of my narrative. The history of that garment, the way that it's worn, there may be how it's been worn before, then also informs what I do with it. So that's part of my process.
And as a printmaker, it makes me think about when you're printmaking, what you're printing on just becomes just as important as the image itself, right? Like you know, you're deliberating over what kind of paper to print on or surface, it's all very important to the final product.
Yeah, completely. And I use all of those techniques, whether it's silkscreen printing or mono printing or litho printing, even etching. I etch onto leather because you can. I use my undergraduate, my first year of undergraduate was really spent in printmaking, trying all of these different techniques. Even photography, anything, taking prints off of things. I mean, I learned very early on that the first paisley was actually, a print taken off this part of the hand. You ink that, and it gives you the pay. That was where that came from in sort of, whenever pagan, whatever, historic.
Yeah.
And so I sort of thought about, how you can take prints off of existing items. So you can put ink on a chair and take a print off of it, or you could put ink on a person, and it all kind of ties together for me, really.
I know in printmaking, it's like, what else can you get your hands on to make a different kind of print? You just made me think about when you talked about the hand, and as a printmaker, sometimes it's not about the traditional methods, it's about the discovery of the non-traditional methods. That's super exciting.
Yeah. And there's also something in my head about a memory. The memory lingers, kind of. I know that there's a painting, somebody, the memory. I remember that as a title from something, and that's always stuck with me. It gives a kind of an indication or a memory of a garment or a person or a place or a time. And it's very important to what I do.
And I love the fact that you bring up the punk rock mentality. I love punk rock as well. I'm a huge punk rock fan. And, that mentality and that zeitgeist really dovetails nicely with, kind of the thinking of a printmaker and, especially if you go outside of the traditional methods of printmaking. I love how your lived experience really speaks to that.
Yeah, well, I think it plays into being resourceful. What are you going to do the day after the apocalypse or something, or when there's nothing? What if all you can do is operate a computer or operate a tablet, you might end up being stuck.
Right.
I'm very. It's about what you can do with your hands.
Yeah.
And I mean, the whole the initial explosion of punk rock to me was a huge moment, especially the women of punk rock, the Slits, polystyrene, X-ray Specs, people like that.
Yes.
That really brought this whole kind of image and music together. And it was also, really not the first time we'd seen women in rock and roll, but the first time we were seeing like women really steering their careers in a way, and just amazing. And it all kind of tied in the fashion, the music, and that moment in time.
And it's really great to see that younger generations still embrace that to some extent. Maybe not as widely spread as we may have seen in our generations at that time, but I have a child who's a huge punk rock kid and huge punk kid. So those elements are still coming around at that age, which is really great.
Yeah, it's taking that philosophy, isn't it, or the anti-philosophy, and applying it to now, not recreating that moment. It's like what's the moment now?
Yeah, it's awesome. There's another theme that sort of resonated with me about your work as well, and it's Actually, I'm gonna flip forward here for just a second. Yeah, again, you know, that idea of the ready-made. So this was before I get a little too ahead of myself here, these are some examples. The first one, the first slide that we looked at was going back to the collection Dante and some of those early roots. And this is really more current. Would you like to talk a little bit about this series of work?
Something that I do is you know, looking at kind of iconic brands in some sort of way. Like what I'm wearing today is a Gap. Underneath this print, it says Gap. You know, and I like to make fun in some way of these huge brands because it's so anti what I've ever wanted to do in terms of fashion, and especially now. I mean, I've always been obsessed with Mickey Mouse. I mean, it's not so much about Disney. It's just like, you know, if I can do something with a vintage Mickey Mouse sweatshirt, I'm going to do it because I love it. But, you know, I was having a little bit of a dig at Adidas with my kind of dripping Adidas things. And, you know, again, it's something that started off for myself to wear. It's kind of now available, and I do them for people to, you know, order. And I tend to, you know, just pick on brands that need to be picked on, like the Gap, Champion, Adidas. My whole things with brands started with Ralph Lauren. You know, I realized that I'd moved to America in the mid 90s, and I became obsessed with Ralph Lauren polo. And I had that everything in every color, in every whatever. And then I started to modify it to fit my needs with print or with something. And that's kind of when I jokingly came up with this brand when Simon met Ralph. So that kind of stuff is more contemporary. I guess that's the right word, but more kind of street wearable. It's not really ready to wear runway designer stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's making fun of this whole, you know, global preoccupation with branding.
Yeah.
And it also ties into where I am now, or have been for the last 20 years, which is really conscious of the environment, sustainable design, and you know, and I don't work with anything brand new. Everything is, I call it, you know, it's worn wear. But these pieces of, you know, I've sourced from either thrifting or estate sales or some way, and it's kind of giving it a second life, but at the same time having a bit of fun with the brand. I have tons of friends that work at Gap. They know that I do it. I don't think they're mad at me.
You know, I love it. It's cheeky. It's irreverent. It's definitely, you know, sort of going after the establishment in a very punk way, if you will. And I love it. It really flips it inside out, turns it on its head. And these are it's a great series that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, they're quite popular.
So I thought what we could do next is take a look at some videos to get a little up close to your work. And you've done some really great video work and just kind of gets the viewer right down to the fabric and kind of travels all over it. So I'd love to play these videos, and we could talk about them a little bit more as well right afterward.
Okay.
Actually, I think we can talk while they're showing.
Yeah. These are quite recent pieces that I've worked on. I'm currently working with Atelier Jolie in New York, which is a new concept, a whole new place that's opened in New York. It's you know, it's run by Angelina Jolie. It's her move into fashion, and I've been working with them for a couple of months now. And some of my pieces are in. It's not really a store. It's a space. It's the old. I think it belonged to Warhol. It was the old Basquiat studio by the Bowery in New York.
Oh, that's
and it's kind of meant as a collaborative situation where people can go in and, you know, participate in creating. That's what it's really about. And my stuff is in there as examples. And people can contact me and I can work with them on doing something. So, you know, like I said, most of my work now is about working with I don't know. It's not all vintage. It's you know, the suit is a 1980s Romeo Gigli suit that I've had for years. Excuse me. And the kind of cut fabric, red embroidered stitch is a piece that I've had around for a while, and it just needed a freshen up. And you know, I printed them with gold to. You know, they're quite special pieces anyway. The garments were very special, and the narrative that I had around these garments was the woman that was going to wear them was most likely going to add more gold to herself to make them special. So, yeah, so it's all worn wear. It's not always, you know, destined for landfill. If I can take something out of the process to go to landfill, I'm very happy. But it's really about taking things that excuse me, once upon a time somebody really cared about war, and then we're kind of driven into this idea that we can't keep wearing things regardless of the sorry, I've got a bit of a cough.
Yeah.
And we're kind of told by these brands maybe that we shouldn't continue to wear them, or we're, you know, in some way we're always, you know, encouraged to keep buying new from season to season. And I'm so not into that part of the industry. I never have been. So it's about, hey, yeah, you might have something in your closet that just needs a refresh, or you know, or take something out of the vintage store and enhance it in some way. That's kind of what my ethos is with these pieces.
And I mean, I think that's pretty commendable to do, because, you know, folks who get into like vintage wear, they sort of buy those objects and they'll rip them apart and reconstruct them or deconstruct them and reassemble to come up with kind of a new thing. But what is so refreshing about your work is that you're doing the same thing. It's the same concept, but applying a very different method towards it, and still getting a very different result. So it's really great to kind of see that being applied. And there are many examples of artists that I can think of that do this kind of with painting, for example, on canvas and things of that nature. So I thought that could maybe lead us into our second theme that I find really fascinating about your work. And you know, some artists throughout art history really invite the sense of chance into their work. As a co-creator, they welcome it, they embrace it. And I really think that you're one of those people. And, you know, so much so that when I was thinking about tonight's conversation, it reminded me of several artworks that we have in our museum collection. And I sent them to you, I think, a ways back as we were preparing for this, but they're by a few artists, and some people may have heard these names. Pat Steer is one of them. Robert Rauschenberg is another. And I'm going to flip forward on my slide here so you can kind of see examples of some of these works. Pat Steer is right up here at the top, left and in the middle. And then you also see a work by Robert Rauschenberg down here in the lower left-hand corner, where there are tire tracks driven through mud. And then you see an example of raku pottery, where it's a firing process that the pottery goes in, and you know it's you're not sure what's going to come out. It's really by chance in terms of what you're going to see. And even the concept of the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi that allows for finding beauty in the imperfect or the impermanent or the incomplete. And chance is a big part of how this happens. So I thought you could maybe speak to that. How you embrace and co-create with the idea of chance.
Yeah, I mean it's when you put it into words like that, it's so much of what I do. It is about that. Those tire tracks blow me away. I've never, you know, when you sent them to me a few weeks ago, it's just like, oh my god, totally. And yeah, that act of chance is. You know, and I still do that. I mean, there are processes that I use, which really are all based off me doing very little. Well, you know, that sounds dreadful, but you know, finding garments with, and it started in so many different ways. I remember years and years and years ago, a friend of mine bought a shirt that had been in the window of a store for years. And it was a blue shirt, and the collar had faded in the sunlight in the window. But if you lifted the collar up, the dark blue was, and it was this incredible, it was like you couldn't design it, you couldn't make it. There's no way you could humanly make it. It was made by the sun. And that really, it was actually my teacher, a woman called Natalie Gibson, who ran the fashion print program at St. Martin's. She had that shirt. And it stuck with me forever. So I'm always using the sun in some way. I do a lot of faded garments, and they're out in my yard. They're hanging outside. There's one right there now. It's been out there for about 6 months. It's a very slow process, you know, but, you know, I do have to, my part of it is selecting that garment and knowing the chemistry of that garment, knowing the chemistry of the dyes, and knowing that the sun will affect it, or as simple as, you know, years and years ago working with McQueen, and we were living in Tooting and we had no money. We were broke, I mean, penniless, and I had one bucket of latex left. It was for the, we were getting ready for nihilism, you know, and I'd been doing these molded, dripped latex and mud dresses in the backyard in our house. And I went running out into the backyard and I kicked over the last bucket of latex, and, you know, which was like, not going to say the words that were said because it was, we didn't have money to buy more. But Lee was just like, don't worry. And it went into like a drain cover, and Lee just laid black organza on top of it. And he said, put glitter on it. I'm like, okay. So I sprinkled all this black glitter on it, and we left it there for a few days to dry and to set and to harden, and we pulled it out of the drain cover, and Lee draped it onto the mannequin, and before you know it, there was this absolutely beautiful dress, this rubber, like bustier kind of thing that would have the imprint off of a drain cover, and it's just like that. Then led into a whole another collection with the birds and using tire tracks and things like that. So yeah. A lot of chance. It's like I'll take. I live quite near the ocean in Northern California, and there's a place called Point Reyes, which, you know, a lot of things wash up on the beach, and surprisingly clothes as well. And so I go out there in bags and all these different things, and I'll go out purposefully for kind of beachcombing clothing, and just to have it around to see that natural degradation of you know, the ultimate sand wash. It's been in the Pacific for God knows how long, and it's like the most incredibly sand washed a piece of fabric, and that somehow then goes into my work in a way. So yeah, that's chance. I use nature, I use chance, you know, and I did study chemistry. So I do know a little bit about what can happen if you can put a couple of different chemicals together. So, you know, I've got some things outside that are rusting right now, and that's, you know, a technique that I use, or etching leather. I know that, you know, Drano is going to burn your skin if you get on it. So if you put it into a print paste and do something with leather, it's going to etch into leather. So, you know, all of those things come together.
Oh, I love it. You know, I didn't know that you had a chemistry background. That's really fascinating because that definitely informs the practice.
Pre-college, it was high school. I went to a high school where you had to very much, you ended up only studying 3 subjects, and I studied art history, architecture history, and chemistry.
Oh, wow.
That was for my last 2 years of high school, my A-levels. That was what my A-levels were in. So it's kind of a really odd mix. Everyone said that's the most bonkers, you know, you're not going to do anything with art. But there you go. It all panned out.
And it makes a lot of sense that you went into printmaking because there can be a lot of chemistry in certain printmaking methods.
Yeah. All the etching, learning about acid.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, what you can put onto something to resist acid and all of those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really helped into my kind of process with textiles.
and those organic process of finding things in nature. I mean, sometimes if you were in the studio and you tried to draw some of those beautiful textures and patterns, you couldn't come up with them in your own mind. You know, you couldn't come up with them if you tried, but then to see it through a process or in nature, you know, and to be open to that is really wonderful. And you can find some beautiful things. And I
Yeah,
love oh,
there's no way I could draw some of this stuff, you know.
mhm.
And it's, you know, also with garments, it's like the way that I fold them before I print them. It gives you a whole different thing. Like on the left is, I think, from the birds, and that was one of the first ready-made. It ended up being called roadkill printing because it was like you were run over. But Lee made the jacket, and beautiful jacket, and he said, can you do blah 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 to print this for me? And I'm just like, are you sure? Such a nice. And he's just like, no, absolutely. And I went off and did that, and he loved it. And actually on the far right, the dripping latex dress was what I was talking about. That was from Nihilism. That was just dripping latex. That dress actually also has pickled locusts that we got from wherever you get pickled locusts from, embroidered onto. It was a statement about famine and what was going on in Africa and things like that at that time. And then handprints have always been very sort of important. That the touch, the hand, they get onto a lot of things with me.
And that sense of memory that becomes involved and imbued in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this human touch. I mean, I just recently did this, consulted with McQueen and the Design Museum in London on the Rebel 30 years of London fashion, and the very first collection that we did, I did with McQueen, was Taxi Driver, and part of was accidental. I was doing some photocopying of some photographs, and my hand was on the glass, and so there would be my fingertips from the photocopier, and that ended up in the print. So I redid that for them for this exhibition. So you walk into this exhibition and finger, my hands. It was always there, and then Lee would just wipe his hands down his t-shirt, and there it was. There would be another t-shirt for the collection.
Love it. Love it. Your work also brings to mind another theme and another word, and it's around this idea of authenticity. And I know that for your career, despite various different industry pressures that come along with being in a fashion industry, you've maintained sort of this uncompromising effort to really hold center a set of values about mass culture and production and fashion and education, and ultimately what their impact has meant on collectively us as a human society, and also on the individual. I wonder if you could speak about how authenticity shows up and influences you in your work, and what does that mean to be authentic?
It's a really good question. I mean, I know that I've been really lucky in my life career, as soon as some of those things show up, whether I've been working at a company, and that sort of the opposite of authentic starts to come up, and I've been able to leave and move on to the next thing. I've been lucky with that, and and I think I don't know. I mean, I when I moved to California, I met a woman called Linda Gross, who was one of the pioneers for sustainability and environmental design, and she really educated me into designing with a conscience, which is part of what's very authentic to me. So yeah, I don't really like mass produced. I like imperfections. I think when you do things by hand, the imperfection or the mistake becomes part of the beauty of the piece. And I think we should be making clothes for people for a need rather than just, you know, to go and shop or something.
Right.
That doesn't feel authentic to me. And so I don't think I'm necessarily answering your question, but,
No,
but
no.
I have this sort of sense that when things start to not feel authentic, and you know, I was in education for a long time,
Mhm.
and that to me is a place where ultimate being authentic is necessary
Mhm.
if you are creating a student-centric environment, and you
Mhm.
know, if you're being authentic to the industry that you're supposedly serving, and authentic to the designers that you're training. I think it's when it becomes that, it's impossible for me to be in that situation, which is why I'm no longer in a full-time situation with education, and I've gone back to my work, you know, full-time. And goodness, touch wood, I've been lucky the last year with lots of work. It's good, but yeah.
Yeah, you said something about how things being trained to think about things having a conscious to them. And, you know, we just are not perfect human beings by any stretch, you know, and I think embracing the imperfections, because what is perfection? We have no idea, but, you know, I think and that's okay. And to be okay with accepting that, embracing that.
Yeah.
And I think that really comes through with your work.
There's also something within that goes back to Duchamp with this kind of
Mhm.
anti-retinal kind of concept, you know, where art is made to please the retina, but authentic work may not please the eye as much. I don't really care about pleasing the eye. You know, I just want to get it to be raw and to the point, you know, and I think that's part of what is authentic for me as well, really, the bones of clothes.
Speaking of authentic, we've talked a little bit about the authentic nature of this exhibition. And one thing that kind of centers the authenticity around Rendezvous is the friendship and the partnership between Lee and An and many of the close collaborators that were in his world. So I thought, you know, we could talk a little bit about that. And I'd love to know, and our audience, share with our audience a little bit about how you met Lee and how your friendship began and how it blossomed.
Yeah, we met actually the very first day of starting the MA Fashion at St. Martin's back in 1990. We were, you know, in the same year, and that the first day we had to present. We were given a kind of entry project that everyone had to work on over the summer, and we all got to present that. I presented mine. Lee was stood next to me, asking me questions, probably more questions than anybody else. And then Lee presented his, and you know, his whole aesthetic was completely opposite to everyone else. Most people had come to the program straight from you know, their 4-year degree, so they had a kind of a conditioning of a particular art school. They had a language with their work. And Lee was coming from Savile Row and then also a season at Romeo Gigli, so his work was more industry. I'd done 2 years in the industry between undergrad and graduate, so I kind of understood where he was coming from, but also I'd never seen sketches like his. I'd never seen, you know, just this very like linear, scratchy quality, these not ugly girls, but kind of different girls. They didn't have a ponytail on the side of their head. They were bald and their pointy ears and pointy, and they were quite sharp. And a really beautiful design aesthetic. Things you know, felt really modern. And I think we bonded that first day over each other's work and the interest in each other's work. And, you know, then, you know, we went out for a drink and we discovered that we loved the same kind of music, the same clubs. A lot of our early friendship was based off of clubs and dancing and nights out and having raucous, hysterical fun. That was what really, I think our friendship was more centered, as much centered in that and kind of growing up together as it was about the work. We worked really well together. and we played really well together. And that was a perfect, we were quite terrible, actually.
That makes for the most creative types, I think, when you can balance the trouble with everything else, and it feeds a little bit of the process, actually. It's great.
I think we only ever, created good trouble. I don't think we created bad trouble. We had a lot of fun doing it and a lot of nights out. We love to dance. We both love to dance. We both love very similar music, so we'd be out a lot, and our work was just, I don't know, we worked well together. That process started at St. Martin's. We were given collaborative projects. Mm-hmm. That was what part of that program was based off of, getting us ready to work as designers, working with other designers. And Lee and I would always choose to work together. And we had some really successful projects.
Mm-hmm. And it's so great at that age when you can find a mate like that, when you can find someone that you can play with and you can also produce with, and you just kind of gel and get on the same page. It's kind of a rare gift,
And Lee was really hungry to learn more because he hadn't had that experience of 4 years of undergrad, that time to experiment. He'd been, Savile Row, Romeo Gili. So he was really hungry to understand about textiles and dyeing and printing. And at the same time, he was super generous with what he was kind of teaching me about tailoring and about cut and about kind of proportion. Lee's proportion was really what revolutionized fashion as much as anything else. His understanding of the human form and what you could do to, modify and distort the human form. And I learned all of that with him. Mm. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to what it sort of meant to see your work activated through those really early McQueen shows? They were really special. They were really electric. Captivated everybody. And what did it mean for you to see your work in that sort of kinetic space?
Well, it meant everything. I mean, that was when I was looking at graduate school, why I really wanted to go to St. Martin's rather than the Royal College, was because St. Martin's had a fashion show for the graduation during London Fashion Week. The Royal College was in July, and I was just like, why would you have a show not in Fashion Week? So I always knew that my work had to be seen in a kind of a show or movement or in some way. And at that time, everything was about shows. So, and then I remember being at Nihilism, which was our first runway. We'd done Taxi Driver, which was a static exhibition, and then the hair just standing on the back of my head, up at the back of my neck, with the clothes anyway. I mean, it was like a whole revolution, the McQueen show and everything that Lee did. But then also to see my work as being part of that, and sort of, thinking, it's not just somebody using a print. It's really a very symbiotic relationship of what I do with what he does. And it kind of, I don't know, it really started to create the vocabulary, the language for what we were going to do. It was very part of the inspiration. So I had to go to see the show, and also to be backstage part of it, and to see the runway. I used to be very, very excited by fashion and fashion shows, not so much anymore, but yeah.
I thought since we've kind of illustrated it a little bit, our next slide, I believe, is a video that's going to show one of those early runway shows. And if people aren't familiar with them, this will just kind of give you a little bit of a taste of what you would experience. So we're That is so great to see, because you can see some of the examples of what we were talking about a little earlier in the conversation. You can see them sort of activated in that footage.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, it's clips from all of the different runway collections that I worked on with Lee, from Nihilism through to Dante. So there's several, and it's I hate to say it, but I feel or look a bit like a one-trick pony. My work it's not rocket science. It's very simple print techniques. It's very graphic. It's very sort of quite often in your face kind of stuff. It's not particularly subtle, but I don't know. It brings back a lot of good memories.
Yeah. There's one piece in particular. Let's see. I think on the next slide we have the William Morris print dress. This garment is in the show, and the image on the left of the slide shows the actual garment that's in the Rendez-Vous exhibition. So I thought we could talk about this work a little bit. Some of the research maybe that went behind it and the process. When we were planning for tonight's talk, you had some really great memories of how this dress was made.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I was thinking about that today, and I remember bumping into Lee and also Isabella Blow at a show. It was a fashion show. It was a student show, and they were sat front row. And I think I was sat a couple of seats behind, and Isabella was insistent that I sat on her lap and be in the front row. So I sat down on her lap, and I remember her saying to me, I'm gonna turn you into the new William Morris. And I was actually, at that point in my life, super offended that she would say such a thing, because I didn't want to be the new anybody. I wanted to be me. But, obviously, had a respect for the work of William Morris. So I lived in Walthamstow, which is where William Morris was from, in northeast London. And the William Morris Museum was like a block away from my house. So Lee would come stay, and we'd go to the museum and have a look. And then we'd go to the kind of look at the arts and crafts collection at the Victoria and Albert Museum and look at the stuff. And so really researching that. And then I was just like, well, why not? Let's just do it. And then I was decorating my house in Walthamstow and ripping years of wallpaper, and I found the lowest layer was like an original William Morris wallpaper that had been varnished to the wall. So it just all came together, and I was just like, you think you're gonna turn me into William Morris? I'll show you, Isabella. And I just very, that was very much hand drawn, based off of a classic William Morris print. I think the bottom right is an original William Morris that somebody found, and I just did the dripping, kind of like melting William Morris onto a dress. And then Sarah revisited that for the last women's ready to wear collection, Sarah Burton's last collection at McQueen. She left and she brought that print back, printed it onto leather, which was a very, very nice kind of way of doing a full circle for me at McQueen, was, being there at the beginning and then just a touch of it being there at the end.
Yeah, I thought that was, when I talk about the exhibition, and we particularly focus on this piece for that very reason. And I thought you could maybe speak to that a little bit more in terms of, there is this full circle moment, and she is featuring your work now in the spring summer 2024 collection. Yeah. These are some really wonderful examples of some of the pieces that you saw out of the menswear collection. And what has it kind of meant for you to reach this full circle moment, and Sarah, the end of an era, and bringing back those collaborators?
Really amazing, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, that started through the pandemic with doing McQueen Creators with her, and reconnecting to my work and doing some things for them through the pandemic, and that kind of just carried on. And then with the exhibition for the Design Museum, and working quite closely this last year with Sarah, and being at the studio, and them building a studio for me at the McQueen head office, and so I could get to play and to create things. And then I came back to California, and Sarah asked if I would do some development for men's. So I quite quickly did some things. But they had an idea of what they wanted, and I didn't want to do that because it was a bit of a cultural reference point for me, and I don't really like to look at other people's cultures for inspiration. So I said, well, I'm not going to do that, but maybe I'll do this, and it will be my version. So yeah, I just folded up some garments and printed them in the backyard and sent them off to London with some videos that I made of the process, and it ended up as this folded print in the men's collection. So it feels, this whole last year really has been, I don't know, it's been kind of amazing. Leaving my job of 27 years, full-time position, going back into the world of McQueen, and that with Sarah, who, Sarah was, I've known for years. She was my student at St. Martin's. I've known her forever. But going back on not recreating, but revisiting, reimagining the very first collection that I did with Lee, when it was really just Lee and I, the two of us working together in Tooting. We created Taxi Driver together. There was nobody else, and having really getting to know that collection again and representing that collection. Mm-hmm. Then going back into ready to wear with Sarah for men's, and then that very little bit for women's, and also at the same time knowing that it was time for Sarah to move on. Mm-hmm. And also, yeah, for me, the door of McQueen is closed, of that particular part of the era, and I wish them all the best for their new, thing. But the Lee McQueen era is continued, for 13 years after he killed himself with Sarah, and that whole era has ended. For me personally, I don't know, but I'm really feel very fortunate to be part of the beginning and part of the end.
Yeah, and it's so exciting to see your work create this full circle sort of moment, and it's exciting to see the pieces and the new collections and how they've been activated. Here's a great image of a model wearing one of the prints on a cape, but then the really beloved singer John Batiste wearing it out and about at a public appearance. It's just exciting to kind of see it live that kind of life. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, fashion is meant to be in movement. It's meant to be worn, mm-hmm. And that's sometimes a conflict for me when clothes aren't in motion, and to have him wear that as a kind of a pre-season, so before it's available, was just a great moment, yeah. And he did some videos of him trying it on, and he was clearly really feeling it and really excited to be wearing that piece. Yeah. And that's kind of part of what we do, isn't it, is to make that person feel good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what it means now to think about the history and the historical aspect of Lee McQueen's legacy, and now how it's being presented in museums, and really thinking about the relevance of that today when we look back at a couple of decades. What is it sort of meant to see different presentations of this history that you have lived and know so well, in these sorts of conversations in museums?
Well, the one thing I'd wish is I wish I'd kept more pieces, because I just didn't. I just, that was never very careful with what happened to things. But, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here with you guys, but, I've seen this collection. I saw it at Sacramento. This is a very authentic collection of pieces. It feels very different to me, and maybe it's because of that narrative between Arne and Lee, and this collection of clothes and some of the pieces, and also the fact that some of those things were touched by me. I don't know. It's like seeing old friends, So it feels really good, maybe more so than there aren't layers of what somebody else wanted this to look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's exactly, I think, how Lee would want this work to be seen, if he would want it to be seen. Who would know that? But it feels good to see some of these pieces that were looked after and cared for some time. And yeah, I mean, it's quite, when I first walked into the gallery, it's an emotional moment, because to be honest, I hadn't seen that dress since the day of the show. It's sort of disappeared, and I'm glad it disappeared somewhere where it got kept for so long. But yeah, I don't think Lee ever made anything to be in a museum. I think it was, if it goes back to that whole thing with Taxi Driver, we lost that collection outside a nightclub, and we didn't really care. We didn't lose a lot of sleep over it. The next day when we realized we'd lost the collection, it was get on with the next thing. So I don't necessarily know if Lee really designed anything to be in a museum, but I'm sure he'd be very happy that it's there.
Yeah, and to get to see visitors come in and get to show some empathy and really open themselves to this kind of story has really been beautiful for us to witness. And I really just have to deeply thank you for being open enough to share a little bit of your memories and your story about Lee McQueen and yourself and your friendship
Welcome. Thank you for
through
having me.
through the exhibition and today's discussion. I'm just wondering, just one final question. What are you looking forward to now creatively? What's ahead for you?
Oh, I'm really loving this project with Atelier Jolie, because it's, they're so on my same path of what they want to do. And I'm just really excited to continue doing what I do. I know I keep saying I don't want to do fashion shows, but I am doing a show in the desert, down in Palm Desert in March. So I'm working on producing a new, and I'm not going to say collection because I don't do collections, but I'm working on a new group of things to show in a kind of show presentation in March. So and things like this, it's like, since I left my full-time job, it's been one thing after another, and all different. And I still do teach. I go to Arizona, I go to Phoenix every few months and do some work with Arizona State. I go to a West Valley college and do some things. So I just want to continue to keep having the opportunity to do lots of different things. And at the same time, I was out in my yard printing a little long sleeve T-shirt for my grandson this afternoon, and then I printed that onto another garment, and then onto another garment, and just to be able to think and to keep making things. That's what I want to do. Pay the bills, right?
Simon, thank you so much. This has been such an inspiring conversation, and there's so many other facets of who you are creatively that we could have gone into. And I hope that folks, I just encourage everyone to check out your Instagram, read up about you. You're certainly in the fashion industry headlines with some of the great projects you've been doing lately. Would you like any other additional thoughts before we entertain a few questions?
No. No, thank you for having me, and I would love to answer some questions if there are any.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to take a look here at the comments. I don't know if you can see that, Simon, but this is coming from YouTube. Simon was talking about, quote, picking on brands earlier with his ready-made work. What brand would you like most to take a jab at that you haven't? Love that question.
Do you know what? This is going to sound dreadful, and I don't know how I'm going to achieve it, but I really want to do something with Tesla. I really want to print some of these Tesla that drive around here, because these people drive around the neighborhood like they own it. They're saving their stupid car. I want to have a go at Tesla next. I've got to think that one through, but yeah.
Is there anything you don't want to touch? Like, it's too whatever. I forget it. Pass.
No, I can't think of anything that's off
Oh,
limits. Not right now, but I'm sure there is something. But yeah,
yeah. Let's see. We can take a look. This is coming from Jean Faith D'Orleans. Can you talk a little bit about making your mark?
making my mark. Actually, physically making the process of what I do. I don't really understand the question or
Yeah. Maybe we could think about it in both ways. Like maybe it's like physically making your mark in your process, and maybe like from a fashion perspective or from an artist perspective, like what kind of mark do you want to make maybe within the larger discussion of what people are doing?
yeah. I don't know. But with physically with mark making, it's like you can use any tool to mark make as long
Mhm.
as you can draw. That is a thing. You have to be able to, put the work in to learning that. But one thing that, because I have spent a lot of time in education, and there's a lot of people out there now in the industry that I've had the honor to teach, and they've had the luck to get to know, whether it's a 4-year degree or a 2-year MA or something. So I know that there are a lot of people out there in the industry doing what they wanted to do, doing what they love. And I had a little part in either developing curriculum or working with them on their portfolio or in some way. And I'm not saying I don't want to appear that I feel responsible for any of their successes. But when I find out that somebody has just got the job that they wanted, or they're doing their own thing, or they're really happy with what they're doing, is very important to me,
Mhm.
Or it's not so much about knowing that I've got something in a museum. I actually couldn't really care about that. I mean, I want to know that somebody's really enjoyed wearing something that I've
Mhm.
had had a really good night, had a really nice time doing something. Um, that's kind of what it is. And if I can shift somebody's perception, or if I can make somebody sort of consider for a minute what they're putting on their back, what the fiber content is, or if I can stop somebody getting into their car and going to the mall and buying another sweatshirt or another dress or another something, then that would be the kind of mark that I would like to leave. And it's, as somebody who's in the fashion industry, it's the worst thing to say, is that somebody who does theoretically produce clothes to sell, which I do, and I'm telling you, don't buy anything.
Mhm.
That's kind of this kind of paradox in what I do. It's like, yeah, I'm making things to sell, but at the same time, I don't want you to get in your car and go to the store to buy it. I don't want to have to go to the UPS to ship it to you, because I'm sort of thinking about all those aspects of it. But yeah, those are the kind of, if I even had a mark to leave, that would be, that maybe I'd change somebody's mind about something.
I love it. I love it. Life is filled with paradoxes. It's just it definitely is human nature, and I think that's a poignant concept to end on. And I'll read one comment just from YouTube from Elena. She says that she is grateful for years of working alongside Simon. This is Elena Eberhard, I hope I said that correctly, and very much looking forward to Simon's creations at Atelier Jolie. So exciting. And thank you so much for doing the talk today.
Yeah, Eleanor is quite an amazing woman. I worked with her for several years. She's a journalist.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Simon, we have so enjoyed today's conversation. I have so deeply enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I could
Yeah.
easily do this for another 2 hours, but there's so much there to think about and explore.
Thank you very much for having me, and and thank you for putting on such an amazing exhibition. because it truly is.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm so just glad that you're willing to be open and be very generous with the memories and the experiences that you've had with Lee McQueen. And I want to thank our audience for being here today and contributing questions and comments. The exhibition is on view, Rendez-Vous, Lee Alexander McQueen and Henri, until January 21st, 2024. We also have a lot of great programs, but you'll be able to enjoy this talk a little bit later. And also, if you would like to hear from Henri as well, another dear friend of Lee McQueen's, we have a Binder podcast where you can hear more interviews and other different memories and experiences with Lee McQueen throughout his life. Thank you all for being here tonight. Simon, thank you again. This was such a treat. And that will conclude our program. And I wish everybody a really great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.